What's it like to be a firefighter or first responder in today's world? We're going to find out next on Lakeshore Focus. Welcome again to Lakeshore Focus, a weekly show highlighting the key issues, important events, and interesting people in our region. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick. Several months ago, we produced a show called The World of Cops. It was a fascinating look at what the life of a police officer is like today. Well, it seemed like we should give equal time to the firefighters. Actually, they threatened that my house might not be protected unless they got equal time. No, they didn't. I was put in touch with them because a new fire training academy is opening in Northwest Indiana. On our show today, we have two veteran firefighters and leaders who are working hard to keep us safe, including me. Let's meet Tom Fieffer, who is the fire chief for the Portage Fire Department, and Mike Parks, division chief for Crown Point Fire Rescue, and also the training coordinator for the District 1 Firefighter Training Council. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm a little concerned. Should I be concerned if I've got firefighters here that my house and everybody else's are still okay right now?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you see us in white shirts, well, Mike's a little bit different, but I don't go to fires too much anymore unless it's really big. As the chief of the department, I spend more time on budgets and in my office.
All that kind of boring stuff?
Yeah, the stuff that you never want to do when you're a firefighter, that stuff.
But you've both been in the trenches, right? So how
Absolutely.
long have you been in the
We come
trenches?
from different departments. We have a combination department. We have 32 career guys, and we also have 32 paid on call or volunteers. So we come from a much different organization. So it's changed over the years. We put on additional people each year on the career side because of the demands.
How long have you been doing this?
26 years. I started in 1991, and things have really changed.
Wow, okay. So how long have you been doing this?
I also started in '91, and I started as a volunteer on the Chesterton Fire Department, and then I moved to National Steel on their fire department, and then in '94 I started a career in the city of Portage, so I've been in Portage since.
So you've talked about your department is made up of both professionals and volunteers, or full-time people and volunteers. Is yours the same way?
No, so Portage is a completely full-time professional department. We staff 19 people a day, spanning 3 fire stations to cover the entire city.
Okay, but some fire departments, what's the difference between when they're all volunteer and, I mean, how do we know which is which?
Funding is the biggest thing. There are some communities that simply can't afford a full career department because it's very expensive, and their call volume may not be so high. So as Tom did, I started out as a volunteer, and then I also went to U.S. Steel as a firefighter in industry, and then I moved over as a career firefighter to Crown Point.
So you mentioned things have really changed since you started in this. Tell me about a couple of things that have really changed, both of you. What really changed?
Back in the day, I mean, they gave you some gear, some boots, and a coat, and they said, okay, there's the truck, here's a pager. When this thing goes off, meet us at the station, we'll show you what to do. That's pretty much how it started back in the day, you know.
Back in the 90s?
Yes.
That's how we were protecting our homes and things?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a little more structured than that, but compared to today, it's really changed. I mean, when I started, I mean, you're talking probably 24 to 40 hours worth of training, roughly. Now, the average recruit is getting 350, maybe even 400 hours of training before he is cleared to make an emergency response and enter into a burning building.
Wow.
So it's really changed.
So what do you see as the differences besides the training?
Well, and a lot of it is just we're not firefighters. I mean, I like to tell people fire is our middle name. We do so much more. EMS is a huge component, and in both of our departments, being a paramedic and responding on the ambulance is a lot of what every fire department does today. So it's just not as simple as being trained to a firefighter level. You have to be trained much greater than that to be a paramedic and respond on the medical side also.
Do you think down the road that title will change to more of emergency responders? I mean, or something broader? Or is it always going to be?
I think it already has. I mean, they're firefighter paramedics, and 80 to 85% of our runs are typically ambulance runs where we're providing emergency medical services. All of our career members have to be paramedics, as do the members of Portage. So it really has changed everything we do. I would agree with Tom. It's not just being a firefighter anymore. It's really being a paramedic, and occasionally we catch a fire.
So how much difference is there in response or emergencies that come up? I mean, are there less fires today than there used to be? It seemed like we putting sprinkler systems and everything, and everybody's supposed to have fire extinguishers. So is it different?
Fire load, fire calls have gone down a lot in the last 25 years. That's designed, and that's
Which is a good
that's what we want. Yes. Right. One of the things I always tell my city officials is I want a year with no fires. I mean, that's the goal. You don't pay us to be there to put out the fire. You pay us to be there to make sure the fire never happens. So, it's a lot of education and stuff up front to make sure that we don't have fires through building inspections, education down to the kindergarten level of making sure that kids understand what to do if they have a fire, and then how not to have fires. So,
well, let's talk about the education thing. That's kind of your middle name, right?
Pretty much.
Education or
Pretty much.
Training is your middle name?
Pretty much.
But it sounds like it's everybody's middle name. So what is all this training particularly, what are you doing to educate the community particularly?
We have programs where we go into the schools. We have programs where the schools come to us. We have daycare centers that come to do tours of the fire station, and we're always trying to spread the message of fire prevention. We also do it, like Tom said, through the Fire Prevention Bureau. We have an inspection bureau that goes out and inspects all the businesses in the Crown Point jurisdiction and check them for fire code violations.
So what's some of the primary messaging that when you're talking to kids, adults, anybody, I mean, what do you want them to walk away with from your educational presentation? What do you want them to, I hate to use the term, burned into their brain, right? What do you want them to really hang on to?
Well, a lot of them vary on age. The very young children, we want them to understand to recognize a problem and to call 911. And as they get older, we start talking about not playing with matches, et cetera. But, it varies by age. And that's one of the things that we're focusing on now. We have a group of people that are revamping our fire prevention education program to address the different age groups, because it's very age specific. All the way up to seniors, even senior citizens, they have a much different message, like making sure they don't trip, rugs, trip hazards, because we get a lot of falls where they fall down and break their hip. So it's not just fire prevention, it's really injury prevention, and it goes all the way from kindergarten up to senior citizens.
And I think it focuses a lot on just safety in general. It doesn't have to be fire prevention, but just the overall safety of how to make sure you're safe, how to make sure your home is safe, and how to make sure that when you get into a situation, what to do, and to have that planned already of how you're going to respond. For most people, we hope that that's their first and only fire. It might be our 1,000,000th fire, but for them, we don't. We want them that one time they know how to respond, because that's their only fire that they've ever been to.
I've never thought about this before, but police respond when somebody is going to hurt you, but I bet we hurt ourselves a lot more than anybody else hurting us. I wonder what the statistics are. We probably are 6 or 10 times more likely to hurt ourselves, trip, fall, damage ourselves, than probably for somebody to come up and push or shove us or hit us.
Well, and
right?
as Mike said too, as we age, and we're an aging society, as that happens, the opportunity is much greater.
And as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of, we're tasked with so many more things than just firefighting. We have a car seat education program teaching parents to put their kids in car seats the right way. We have a Project Lifesaver program where Alzheimer's and dementia patients are placed with a band so that if they wander from home, we can find them. There's just so many things that we're tasked with. The firefighting is honestly just a small fraction of what we're expected to do, and that's changed over the years since when I started.
I think the depiction of firefighters historically has been, you're kind of in this stressful job, waiting for the bell to go off and slide down the pole. Do they even use the poles anymore?
We have one.
Yeah, we do too.
Is it just for fun, or?
No. Our guys use it.
Okay.
It's much quicker to go down that pole than the stairs.
Okay. So anyway, I think people's idea is like you're just waiting, and then all of a sudden there's all this tension, and you're in the truck, and there's a fire and everything. It sounds different. It sounds like the pressure
Oh,
of what you do is
it's not
different.
waiting. Generally, we're doing something else, like a fire prevention inspection or a car seat or doing an ambulance run, and that's when the fire comes in. Very rarely are we sitting around doing nothing and the bell rings.
Yeah, all the tension and all the things that you talked about that is still there. That's very much so. But the days of us just sitting around waiting for the bell to go off is not the case. It's training. It's being prepared. It's if it's not EMS training, it's fire training. If it's not fire training, it's some kind of public education program. It's a bicycle safety helmet
Hazmat.
roto that we're going on, or a hazmat. There's just.
Do you feel like when you're doing the education piece or, even fire inspections or anything, how much do you feel like if I don't do this right, these people could get hurt? If they don't listen or don't pay attention. I mean, does that feel like some level of pressure to you?
Well, yeah, I think because we want to make sure that we're sending a good message, so that way people can know how to respond in the appropriate manner. And the hard part is if you're looking at a lifelong of education to people, most departments, if we think about this, most departments really started a public education program about 15 years ago, would you say, Mike? About 15 years ago? So if you start with those people in first grade, they're 5 or 6. So now those people are in their 20s. So everybody older than that probably had a very, very small segment of education from the fire department. One of the first days I got on the job in Portage, my parents came to visit me. And, I had been a volunteer on Chesterton for about 3 years at that point, so I had been in the station and everything, and when my mom walked in, she was like, I didn't realize how big this fire truck is. She had no clue. I mean, it's a semi sitting in the building.
Right.
They're just so huge. And I'm thinking, how does my mom, who I'm a firefighter, who I'm supposed to be teaching the public, how does my mom not understand how big the fire engine is?
Right.
So that was kind of my light of, wow, public education from the fire department when my mom was a kid probably wasn't as good as it needs to be or where it is today.
Well, I look at those trucks when I'm seeing them out, I'm like, that looks really complicated to operate. There's just a whole lot of bells and whistles and buttons on those things.
That's another
I'm
big
like,
change. I mean, things
Yeah.
have gotten really expensive. I mean, it is really expensive to buy those big fancy trucks now, which places additional burden on the fire departments.
You've got to keep all the equipment up because it's got to be working. Can each of you maybe talk about a time where you felt in your career, I mean, you really felt you made a difference? I mean, you did something that's like, man, I just feel really good about being in this job and doing what I just did.
That's kind of hard. I think that's a really hard question to answer because I think at every day, even as a chief now, every day when I go home, I feel like I've done something to, my role today is to improve firefighters' lives, right? To make sure that they have the tools so they can go out and improve other people's lives. But I think every day when I go home, I think that I've accomplished something that's going to, make it better. So I think it's really hard just to pinpoint one. I mean, I can think of times where I've, you've given birth, or you help assist. Mom gives birth.
I started to say this could be really interesting.
Yeah, no, mom's giving birth, but you're there to do the things that you need to do, and on those occasions you feel really, that's like probably one of the most exciting things we do, other than running into a burning
I saved a
building.
life or brought a life into the world. Yeah.
Generally, every call that we go on is very similar to that, though, because generally people call us in their time of need. It may be something that we think is really simple, but they obviously have an emergency that they can't deal with, whether it's water backing up in their home, a water pipe, a sewer backup, a cat in a tree, you name it. I mean, they call us and they need help. So,
You're right, and a lot of us would look at that and kind of chuckle, perhaps, and say, well, a cat in the tree, whatever. But if that cat is that woman's
Absolutely.
companion.
It was important
Yeah,
enough for
I mean,
them to call 911 and us to
Right.
respond. So we take that very seriously.
What do you look for in people who are coming into the ranks of professional firefighters these days? I mean, what kind of characteristics, if you have candidates coming in?
A lifelong desire to learn, because it never ends. Our profession keeps evolving. They have to be willing to change. They have to be willing to get continuing ed in all the different subjects. They have to be able to become a paramedic. That's one of our requirements, and it's very difficult. You're talking about a 2,000-hour program. Takes well over a year, sometimes a year and a half to get through. and they have to be able to do that. So we have to
So this
evaluate.
is way more than a high school education these
absolutely.
days.
Well, and you also, you have to care. One thing you can't, I mean, you can get through a lot of things. The one thing you can't get through is caring. Like Mike said, when you show up there, these people, whatever the problem may be, is the biggest problem that they've ever had. And if you don't care enough to realize that that's their biggest problem, then you can't, you just can't continue to do this day in and day out. Because if you don't care about their problem, then you don't care to solve their problem. And we're there for one reason, and that's to solve
How do you figure
problems.
out if a candidate has that quality? Because I think you're right. You can't really teach that, right? It's hard to teach. But how can you determine if somebody walks in and says, I'm interested in, I've applied for a job here, you're interviewing me. How do you figure out if I really care or not?
We were actually just talking about this, prior to coming in for the interview, and it's interesting because being a combination department, we have the opportunity to put them on a long-term job evaluation or job interview, because we may see them for 6 months or a year or 2 years before we hire to the career ranks. So we have a really good opportunity to get to know people before we hire them as careers. So we almost use that as a farm team, like using a baseball analogy. We use that as a way to recruit our career members.
You're talking about the volunteer
Yeah, the volunteer
corps
component, yep.
that kind of supports the fire
So we have a little bit of an advantage on that, whereas Tom probably relies more on his interview process.
Well, but I would say this though, even in our situation as being a fully career department, most of the people that are applying are coming from they're already in a volunteer organization.
Yeah, they may be
doing
one of my
something.
volunteers.
Right, they might be one of his volunteers.
Would you accept a good recommendation from him, from somebody?
Well,
we work together.
Yeah, we've hired people and they've hired people. So yeah, that it's come back.
We've stolen each other's people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we did the World of Cops, Greg Mance, the chief for Griffith, was on here, and he talked about when they interview candidates, if they can't take them, they try to send them to somebody else and say, hey, here's a great candidate. We don't have room for him, but man, you guys ought to hire him. Another department needs him. So it sounds like some of that's going on with you guys too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and not everybody's right for every situation. I mean, there are people that would be great firefighters that might work really well in Crown Point that maybe can't work well in Portage, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So
how often do you let somebody go? How often do you say, this is not for you?
Well, I think if you redefine the question, we don't let people go that often. Okay. I think in Portage's world anyway, a lot of times what happens is the people realize that this isn't for them. It's not so much we're telling them it's not for them. In a lot of our cases, they realize, hey, this isn't for me, so I need to step back.
I would agree. We have the same thing happen. We have people that leave for other professions or go to other departments. We generally don't have to make those decisions. Yeah. They happen on their own.
It works out.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about this training side, because you both keep talking about this education. Both you're educating people, and you need to keep a really highly educated person be a firefighter and a paramedic. So where do they get all this training? And there's this new training center now, so it's going to be opening up here.
We've already used it.
Yeah,
it's being used currently.
Last weekend there was 100 firefighters training.
Okay. So what kind of training is going on in these, and what does this center, this academy, bring to our region?
Well, we talked earlier about when both of us started, most of it was on the job training. And I think just like other trades and other industries, it's evolved into a much more complex training program. And a lot of the departments tried to do it in-house originally, and now we've taken more of a regional approach. After the events of 9/11, the state organized into 10 districts, and we kind of agreed to not fight fireworks anymore, and in order to get some funding to provide firefighter training. So that's actually where our firefighter funding comes from for training, is from the fireworks tax. So that tax money goes to providing funding. So District 1 is here, Lake Porter, LaPorte, Newton, and Jasper County. And we provide training to nearly 70 some fire departments and about 2,000 firefighters, because the departments just can't do it themselves. Back in the day, there used to be training facilities at each department. Gary had their own, and East Chicago had their own, Munster had their own, Portage did their own, even the volunteer departments did training within their own departments. But it just became too demanding, one, because we have too many other efforts that we're doing, and two, sometimes you don't have enough people. Maybe bring one guy on at a time. It's difficult to train one firefighter at a time.
Well, and your training is only as good as your best person, and you may have a better person who's really good at something in another department who could be a great teacher for that.
Right. So with this new training facility that we've been needing for a long time, we're able to bring all those folks together. So we're getting ready to start a career academy that Tom will have folks in. We're going to have probably 11 or 12 people from various departments. I think 5 or 6 different departments in the area in three different counties, Lake, Porter, and LaPorte County. And they'll come together and they'll train together at the facility. What's
the hardest thing to teach someone? Besides
caring, because you can't teach them that.
Right.
Well,
what seems like it's really a challenge to get people to grasp?
I think one of the hardest things it is to teach people, especially if we're just talking about fires for a second, one of the hardest things is their SCBA and understanding, you're kind of in a claustrophobic situation when you have your pack on. As you're breathing in there and everything's kind of closed in on your face. The hardest thing to get people to understand is when you're uncomfortable not to take that stuff off. Because that's the definite killer right there, because the atmosphere around you is going to kill you. But I think it's just kind of in human nature to go, well, I don't like all this on me, so I need to get it off. And I think that's one of the areas where when we see people who struggle, that's probably one of the biggest areas that we see them struggle in is this is your life safety, don't remove it.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about something
And that's
like
where the MAC training facility comes in, because not only can we put them in those training scenarios, but we can have facilities or structures or props that create a stressed environment that you can't duplicate without those facilities. So I'm talking a live fire training facility, a flashover chamber, even search and rescue facilities that have reduced visibility, so that you can exercise those things and put them under that stressed environment to see how they react and train them how to react. Because we can't duplicate in the firehouse. We can't set our firehouse on fire and put them in for training. But we can simulate fire at the training facility and put them under those stress conditions to make sure that they know how to react properly.
Which is probably the other difficult piece of this, is how to deal with the stress of those immediate situations.
Absolutely.
So when Mike and I started, like we said already, my first fire was at Mrs. Smith's house in downtown, and you're actually, you're doing it. You're there and you're doing it, and the smoke and the heat and everything's coming down on you, and the reality of, I'm going to come across Mrs. Smith and maybe have to pull her out of this building. All that stuff is hitting you right then and there when you're actually doing it.
So this is literally the trial by fire kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
and that's not the time where I decide, I don't think I need to be a firefighter, right? That's the time when I have to do the job.
But now with facilities like the MAC, we're able to put them in those stressed environments where
I can start small.
Yeah.
I can just put smoke on them. No heat, just smoke. Now you can't see. Function without seeing. And then when they can do that, then we add the heat.
We're down just a few seconds, but if there was one message you would like people to understand about safety, what would it be? One message from either one of you.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that we're pushing right now, and I think every fire department does this, if we look at just overall safety, smoke detectors. There's always been a huge push in Portage to have smoke detectors, and you need to, make sure your smoke detectors work and that they're functioning.
Got them. One quick one from you.
Oh gosh, there's so many. I would agree with the smoke detectors. That's a great one, because so many fires we go to and they don't have operational smoke detectors. It really is critical.
Well, maybe having a double message on that will sink into a few people. So I really appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate all you do for our communities, and just listening to you today, I'm definitely feeling safer. So this is good. I'm not going to make sure I trip either. So thanks for being here, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do you remember hearing about a book which proposed that everything one needed to know about life and how to succeed could be learned in kindergarten? Having spent a little time with firefighters, I wondered if we could apply the same concept and propose everything you need to know could be gathered from the wisdom of firefighters. Let's try it. First lesson: respond when the bell rings. When there is a burning problem, get moving. Don't stand around and let a blaze run its own course. That could be a disaster. Jump up and make your way quickly to the heart of the problem. Lesson 2, don't run into a burning building. Maybe we should say don't go blindly. Know what you are facing. Stop, look around, and assess the situation before you take action. Number 3, use a ladder to get higher. Many problems are out of reach, over our heads. You are not a superhero like Spider-Man who can scale a wall. Use the tools you have to get to the spot you need to be. 4, you need a hose to spray water. Well, not always a hose, but a way to get the water from the source to the problem. Know what you need, show up equipped to act, and have the right tools. Of course, you have learned from today's show, training prepares you to be effective and safe. Lesson 5, don't irritate the other firefighters. They're your partners, are there to help, and may save your life. Teams work best. You cannot do it alone. Last lesson, don't pour gas on a fire. Okay, just about every idiot knows this one. But how often do we add fuel to a blaze? When do we make the problem worse? Act without thinking. Yell fire when we should have handled it differently. Don't make the obvious, common, or repeated mistakes. There you have it, 6 great yet simple lessons taken from the wisdom of the men and women who strive to keep us safe and know how to succeed. As always, I want to hear from you. We welcome your comments and thoughts about the content of this program or what is happening in our communities. You can email us at focus@lakeshorepublicmedia.org or reach us on our website, both listed on your screen. Seldom a week goes by without someone saying, I missed your show last week. How can I watch it? Well, they must not wait until the show ends because nearly every week I remind them past shows are on the website or can be seen on YouTube. Now you know. Join us again next week for another Lakeshore Focus. Until then, I'm Keith Kirkpatrick saying, make a positive difference in our world today.